Hey everyone, I want to talk about this paper that you have to write. This is your paper on a working costume designer. You can check your syllabus for the due date, and it will be due by 11:30 p.m. on that day to the Dropbox on D2L. Okay, so what do you have to do for this? For this, you need to find a designer and do some research about them, write it up in a paper, drop it in the Dropbox. So you've got to find a designer first, and there are lots of ways that you can find a designer. So it might be a show that you like. It might be a play, could be regional, off Broadway or Broadway. So regional means the alley theater, okay? The Guthrie Theater. It doesn't mean your local community theater. That does not count. It can also be somebody who designs for a television show that you like or a movie that you like. So, some examples. You could talk about Paul Taswell, who is the costume designer for Hamilton on Broadway. Interestingly enough, last semester he did a conversation that was on Facebook. And so I played that for the costume design class. A lot of information there. You could say, I want to research the costume designer for SpongeBob SquarePants. I mean, really, the process that you have to go through to take this cartoon, and remember, in the cartoon, those aren't people. They're sponge and starfish and blowfish and a squirrel. But they had to have human characteristics. And now we have humans playing the part. How do we give them the characteristics of the original character? What I love about Hamlet is it's period costume that is not period costume. It's that blend of the modern and the period. How did Mr. Taswell do that? Something to think about. Television shows. There are some really good television shows out there right now. As a matter of fact, all three of these examples that are here, I watched during quarantine. Lovecraft Country. Oh my goodness, the costume designs, the hair and makeup design in that show. Harlots, which is set in London, Paris, one of those. It's set overseas in the period immediately following, really, the American Revolution. And then, of course, there's Mrs. Maisel. Mrs. Maisel is very much the same 1950s that Lovecraft Country is, but it's different. And you can see that just in the publicity photo there. There's a control of color in both of them, but it's more urban, it's more New York City. So, who did the costume designs? How did they do the costume designs? What was their influence in doing those costume designs? That is something you need to think about. Some other things you could look at. You could, if you just love Game of Thrones, you could talk about the costume designers for Game of Thrones. You could do a comparison contrast between the original Star Trek and a more modern version of Star Trek. If you really want to do something wonderful, you could talk about the Carol Burnett show. I'm not going to name the costume designer on that one because if you decide to do it, you need to look it up. But it's a very famous costume designer who worked on that show. And every 7 days came up with all these new characters. What was their training? How did they do that? All right. So you need to start somewhere. Oh, film. I didn't talk about film. Film, Black Panther, any of the Hobbit type movies, any of the Star Wars type movies, any of period movie. You could anything, almost anything that they show on PBS from the BBC is has interesting costumes. Start with something that you like and that you're interested in, and that's going to make it more interesting to do the research on the paper. Okay, so what are the requirements of the paper? For this paper, it must be a minimum of 3 to 5 pages. You must have a minimum of 3 sources. That means a book, an article, article, they can be electronic articles, or they could be articles in actual magazines. Extra credits, shoot them an email. You know, actors get emails all the time with people asking them questions. Costume designers, not so much. You'll be surprised. They will answer you. Many of them will send you an answer. So you could send them 3 or 4 questions in an email. You know, I was researching you and I saw that you went to school at Yale. How did you decide to go to school at Yale? Okay. Don't ask them questions that you can easily find the answer to, but ask them an extension of that question. You need to include a bibliography. Okay. If you quote somebody else, you must have that annotated in your paper. This is a college level paper. Your sources must be cited and you must have a bibliography page. Okay? Now, I don't care if you use MLA or AP or Chicago style. If you have a style that you know how to write in, you should use it. But I know what all 3 of those should be, and I will recognize, oh, you're writing in MLA style. So then I will be making sure that you have done MLA style correctly, right? I am going to suggest that if you can finish your paper a couple days early, you can submit it to the online writing lab that everybody is a member of on D2L. You submit your paper, and within 24 to 48 hours, they'll send it back to you, marking, they'll proofread it for you. Okay, so where do you start? I really recommend you start with the International Broadway Database or the International Movie Database, imdb.com, ibdb.com. Those are great places to start. But we also have a great library here on campus. And if you haven't met Tina Oswald, shoot her an email. You know, during COVID, people are being very careful about spending time with other people. But shoot her an email and tell her what you're looking for. Go to the library site. You can look her up, Tina Oswald, and she will help you find things that will help you write your paper. There are Stage Directions is a great magazine, and the costume or a costume designer might not be on the front cover, but there are often articles within the magazine. So if you have access to Stage Directions magazine, you can look through that also. It's a great source to work from. There are also several books out there that are wonderful for information. The Magic Garment is the costume design book that we have used quite a bit. I have books in my office. You might, if you're struggling, don't come to me first, go to the library first. But if you're really struggling on finding information on someone, ask me. I might have something, I might be able to help you with that. Okay. What should you be writing about? Why did you pick this designer? I was watching this movie, this television show. I saw this show on Broadway. What caught your eye? Their sense of imagination, their use of leather, their historical work, how they tie historical and modern together. Okay, so I really liked their work on the television show, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. What else have they designed? Oh, well, they've also designed this and that. And do they do something else? Well, you know, they started out in fashion, but now they do television. Or, yes, this Broadway designer also does scenery and lighting. You know, what else do they do? Do they have a specific style? Oh, yeah, they only do period shows. Oh, they only do modern clothing. Where did they learn how to do that? Did they go to school? Maybe they went to fashion school. Maybe they went to Yale and have a master's degree. Maybe they didn't go to college at all and they learned by working in shops. Maybe they started out as a tailor and now they're designing because they were the tailor for this designer and they learned from that designer sort of in the apprentice system and then became an assistant designer and now they're designing. What advice would they give to somebody else? That's a great question to ask if you're going to reach out to them. You know, I'm just starting out in my career. What's one piece of advice you received that you'd be willing to share with me as an up and coming designer? It's a great question to ask. What's a little known fact about them? Little known fact. You were an Olympic ice skater. People have lives outside of designing costumes. What's a little known fact about them? What was the very first big thing they designed? And that you can include if they've won, they haven't won a Tony Award in a few years, but they have an Oscar for this movie, that kind of thing. What's the most recent thing they designed? Well, this movie is from 10 years ago, but I really like it, but they're still working. And what's the most surprising thing you learned? I had no idea that they didn't go to college, or I had no idea that they started out making hats, those kinds of things. Those are great things to write about in this paper. And finally, I want to make sure that you are writing a college level paper, and that's why I really recommend you finish it a little early and submit it to the online writing lab. It must be properly formatted. Okay, that means you have 1 inch margins on all sides. We recommend Times New Roman size 12 double spaced, but there are other fonts that are equivalent to that. You should have an opening paragraph that has your thesis in it. There should be several paragraphs in the body of the paper, and the concluding paragraph that wraps it all up and ties it back to the thesis paragraph. Okay, so make sure that you submit this to the Dropbox on D2L on the day that it is due, or you can even submit it a little bit earlier. All right, if you have any questions about writing your paper, please don't hesitate to contact me.